Hey everybody, welcome to Saturday Morning Coffee, Season 2, Episode 1, The Nutrition Condition. That's right, we're going to be firing up our show, Saturday Morning Coffee, again. So that means on Saturdays, after I finish uploading each episode, you'll get to hang out with me and this little nose that's poking up from the bottom of the screen because he just can't stand to not be the center of attention. But we have a couple of upgrades moving forward, which are pretty cool. I don't know if you guys can see, but I've got some earbuds now that are replacing my microphone. Sound quality should be a lot better, and when I do interviews in the future as well, that should really help out too, allowing me to kind of shift around how the sound is played for recording purposes. So on that note, some other things to keep in mind is as we move forward with the show, what I'm going to end up doing is through the Facebook group every week, I'm going to make it known what the topic is going to be about, so that way you guys can kind of write in and let me know, what do you want to know? What do you want me to talk about? What are some questions you have, answers that you'd like? So that way I can personalize the show a little bit more for you guys, so it isn't just me sitting up here rambling about topics, but it's more pertinently getting to what it is that you want to know. This will also help work around not everybody is necessarily available at the time when I do the show live, so yeah, we're gonna find ways to work around all of that. But anyways, I digress. So today, guys, we're going to be talking about nutrition. This isn't the only time we're going to be talking about nutrition. It just happens to be day number 1. So first, I want to open up with kind of giving you guys my own personal mantra, my own personal belief system around nutrition. One of the biggest obstacles that we tend to face as human beings when it comes to nutrition is we view it as an emotional connection. We treat food as something more than what it is. It's fuel, really, at the end of the day. But as human beings, it's very easy for us to become susceptible to stress eating, emotional eating, and all sorts of other unhealthy emotional attachments formed around eating. These can manifest and start in a number of many different ways. One of the biggest ones, and this one's especially out there for any of you parents, don't ever use food as a reward or a punishment when you're trying to get your kids to do something, or rewarding good behavior or bad behavior. Like, oh, hey, yeah, you did really good. We're going to go to McDonald's today because you did good. No, you don't want to do that, because what that sets up is later in life as adults, they're going to start to equate food, nutrition, with good and bad things. And I mean, this isn't always going to be necessarily something that can derail everything about your life, but it can very easily. It can form very unhealthy emotional attachments. It can absolutely lead to stress eating. It can absolutely lead to emotional eating. It can lead to a number of eating disorders and things like that. And that's actually a really good jumping point for our next topic with how we relate to nutrition, how we relate to food and fuel. Eating disorders are a very real thing. They plague tons of people. You probably know somebody in your own life who has dealt with that to one extreme or another. You may not even realize it. A lot of people aren't necessarily public about issues like that, and very personal. But it really goes hand in hand with the emotional response to food. So first and foremost, one of the biggest things that we want to try to move away from in the pursuit of being better with our nutrition is we have to identify any potential unhealthy or even healthy emotional connections we have to food. We want to completely get rid of our emotional attachment to food. And we want to start just focusing on it as a fuel source. Now, that doesn't mean you can't enjoy what you're eating. I mean, let's be honest. It is nice to enjoy a good meal. There's a reason why sweets taste the way they do. There's a reason why they have the dopamine effect on the brain, and they convince you that you want more of them. Um, so let's look at that from a little bit of a scientific perspective first. Why do we get that pleasure response from food? If we're trying to completely devoid ourselves of emotional attachment to it, it doesn't seem like our brain's really working with us, right? Because we get that pleasure response. Well, you got to think back to when we were a hunting and a gathering society, when, as human beings, you didn't always know when your next meal was coming. You didn't always know if you were going to have another meal. So what happened is our system developed a way to let us know that calorie-dense foods that were going to help us store fat that we could then use during lean times were good. So our brain started to develop this response, this pleasure response, that when we were eating really sweet, caloric-rich foods, we liked that, we enjoyed that, we wanted more of it, and you would typically then indulge until you hit a palate fatigue. And sometimes those foods wouldn't even reach a palate fatigue because of the body's response to trying to store all of the energy for later use. So now fast forward to where we live in the first world, very developed, and as far as hunting and gathering goes, a lot of us don't have to worry beyond walking to our refrigerator. I know in this day and age, even it's gotten crazier. I can't tell you the last time I remember grocery shopping. I get my groceries delivered now to my house. That's that would be, imagine if, rather than spending a day out hunting and gathering, the prey item and or the berries and the nuts just kind of wandered into camp and left themselves there for you. Yeah, we didn't have that back then. We have that now. So it's a parallel as to why we develop these very unhealthy emotional attachments around food, because it isn't as difficult for us to get food anymore. It's very accessible. Some of the other things that tend to happen with this as well, you have bored eating, you have binge eating, you have calorie restriction, all sorts of these things. They all fall under the unhealthy emotional attachment with food. So step number one is identifying where your unhealthy attachment is to food, whether it's restriction, whether it's bored eating, whether it's stress eating. You need to identify what your particular issue is with it, because if you don't identify it, you're not going to start to be able to work against it. So with that in mind, I had a couple people write in for the question of nutrition, and ironically, everybody's questions really did focus around this emotional connection point to food. So we're going to dive into that now and take a little bit of a closer look at that. So the first question that we got, and this comes from, hold on real quick. I don't want to misquote who is asking us this question. So this comes from our member Tina. She would like to know, how do I change my behavior, which is turning to unhealthy food, when I feel tired and stressed? Now, this is an awesome question and a great place to start, because everything that I just rambled on about in the last 8 minutes really ties into that a lot. So how do I change my behavior, turning to unhealthy food when stressed? Now, the whole, how do I want to word this? The hierarchy or the pyramid of change. So just like with any other behavior in the human language, it all starts at recognition. So the first step in changing a behavior like that is recognition. You need to recognize the behavior. So the behavior is, when I am stressed, I eat food. Okay, so you've recognized that is a problem behavior. So then the next step, the next step up in the pyramid is, what is the trigger? Okay, so stress, high stress, high anxiety, that's the trigger. All right, so now we understand that there's this unhealthy attachment. I eat when I'm stressed. The trigger is stress. Okay, now there's a couple different avenues we can pursue trying to alter this, trying to change this. First, we could look at maybe why we're getting stressed, why we're getting anxious. Is that something that's within our control? If it is within our control, well then eliminating those stressors, eliminating those anxiety triggers should, in theory, get rid of that behavior. But now if it's stress and anxiety that's outside of our control, well, we're going to kind of be banging our head against the wall if we try and change those, if we try and work on those specifically. So what we want to start thinking about more is replacing the behavior with something that's a little bit more healthy for us. Because you're not going to be able to get rid of that stress and anxiety. You're not going to be able to get rid of that trigger. So now, the further step from that is to then replace the behavior with something healthier. So we recognize we recognize the stress, the anxiety. We recognize the trigger. Now, typically, we would turn to binge eating or eating unhealthy food. So what we want to do is we've recognized that, we've moved to that, we see it, okay? So now here's where it comes the tricky part. We have to do something else. Okay. So we're turning to the food because it gives us that dopamine, that pleasure response, right? So ideally, we want to replace that with a different behavior that also, gives us that relaxing, pleasurable response, but we don't want to turn to food for it. So what I would recommend for you and for anybody else who's suffering from this, make yourself a short list of activities that take no more than 5 minutes to do, that you enjoy, that you find stress reducing. Because you need to come up with this list, because I can tell you, oh, you should try meditation, or you should try, doodling, you should try to do a whole bunch of different things. And I will. I'm going to give you guys a list of, my recommendations, but at the end of the day, it has to be something that's personal to you. It has to be something that you want to do. I can tell you to go and meditate, but if that's just not jiving with you, you're not going to be able to replace a pleasurable behavior with something that you're not really jiving with. So make yourself a short list of replacement behaviors. So once you have your short list of replacement behaviors, then you have to actually go through the process of trying to implement those. This is where we come into biohacking, essentially taking your own operating system and pulling out the pieces you don't like and putting in pieces you do like. Just with anything else in life, it takes practice and it takes repetition. If you don't practice, if you don't repeat, it's not going to stick. You can't just do it once and be like, yep, that's it, I'm done, I win. You got to keep working at it every single day. Eventually, you will start to replace that automatic behavior with the new behavior you're trying to insert there. Then you don't have to try as hard because it's become an automatic behavior, like tying your shoes or brushing your teeth or anything else that's ritualistic in what you do. You've now essentially hacked your own programming and you've given it a different output. So what my short list would be if I was going to suggest to somebody, okay, I'm stressed, I'm anxious, I'm going to turn to food. Well, first on that short list, I would remove all of those foods that I tend to enjoy binging on. When I was growing up, one of my big ones was Oreos. I would eat those by the sleeve and think nothing of it, and that absolutely was not a healthy option and or alternative. Now, I just say that as a broad example. One of the things that I started doing initially is I started to reduce the amount of junk food or snacking type foods that I would have available to me. Eventually, the only kind of snacking foods that I had available to snack on, it would be fruits or vegetables, other things that either A, aren't going to elicit that same kind of dopamine response that, say, a cookie or a cake or ice cream would have for me. But instead, if I am actually hungry and I do want to snack, well, there's an option. There's something I can snack on that, there's a little bit of sugar in fruit and that's going to give you a little bit of a pleasure response, but you're not going to end up, breaking the bank or going on a wild fruit binge. I suppose you can, depending on what level of unhealthy attachment you have to food, but that's for a different topic. We're focused right now on, trying to replace a behavior. So, first on the short list, try to start removing those foods that you tend to binge and snack on and indulge in that just they're not doing it for you. They're not doing anything for you positively. Now, if you live in a house with other people, it gets a little bit trickier because then you're kind of imposing your will on them. So if you are able to remove those items, it's a very quick way to get past all this, to biohack yourself. But if you're not able to, okay, it does get a little bit trickier because it's going to take a little bit more willpower from you because the option's there. So you have to make that conscious choice not to. But if you give yourself a distracting activity, on my short list, I would include meditation. And when I say meditation, generally speaking, my meditation time isn't me sitting in a corner or on the floor or on a pillow with my legs crossed and thinking, doing the om. That's not my meditation. My meditation is actually going for a short walk and going on a very familiar route, so I don't have to be, super focused on where I'm going. And while I'm going through that, I let my mind wander. I let my mind become blank. I let it wander. I let it become whatever my mind wants to do at that moment. I let it do. I don't restrict it. Some of my best, walking moments have just been completely devoid of thought outside of just processing the sights, the sounds, the smells, what's coming in. It's one of the reasons why I enjoy hiking so much. But, a short 5-minute walk around the neighborhood, you can't really call that a hike. But anyways, so something like that, quick and distracting. You could also try doodling. If you keep a notepad handy. I tend to always have a little notepad with me wherever I go. This is my big notepad, but I do have a smaller notepad that I call my brain book, and I typically keep it in my bag when I'm traveling or when I'm out at the gym working, and when I'm here at the house, it's within reach almost anywhere that I am. And it's filled with doodles, it's filled with notes, it's filled with anything that I need to remember throughout the day. But the most important thing is it's accessible if I feel like I need to do something to distract myself from something else. Example here, stress eating, anxiety eating. So I pull out my little book and just doodle a little bit, write a little bit. Moving on from there, you could even go as far as to pull out a deck of cards and play a quick game of solitaire. Again, the short list is activities that you would enjoy that are distracting, that will pull you away from the moment of what you're doing, but you need to enjoy them because you want to elicit that same type of anxiety-reducing response. So I hope I was able to answer your question, Tina, to your satisfaction. Unfortunately, a lot of people don't like to hear the word, you got to do the work. But I mean, at the end of the day, that is it. So I will tell you, remember to practice your pyramid of hierarchy, okay? Recognize, identify, exchange, okay? Recognize the behavior, identify the trigger, insert the new behavior. Brain just kind of went blanked for a second there. As you guys know, I do these shows completely unscripted, so sometimes I ramble, and sometimes the brain just stops working. But anyways, we're going to move on to our next question next. Okay, so this one is a little bit similar to the topic we were just discussing. So this comes from our viewer, Robert, and Robert would like to know how to overcome eating from boredom. And then the cool part about this question is that another viewer followed it up, Cynthia, and she said, yeah, I want to know about that too, but I want to take it a step further. When you know you're eating out of boredom, why do you still do it? Well, let's unpack that first by kind of paralleling to what we were just talking about with that whole hierarchy of behavior and whatnot. And you have to remember, there's always a logical response to it, even if it's not logical to us. Like when I say logical, I mean logical in sequence. You have Sorry, I just muted myself there for a second. I'm still learning these things. So we first have to recognize the behavior. We have to recognize what triggers the behavior. Then we have to insert something else with the behavior. Okay. So when we're talking about boredom, it's very similar to stress and anxiety. We're not feeling something. We're not feeling ourselves. So we turn to something that gives us that dopamine response, that pleasure response, i.e., in this situation, food. So again, my biggest tips and suggestions to getting through this, first and foremost, the biggest one I can offer you is getting rid of the junk food. You don't need it. You don't need it. It's not doing you any favors. It is nothing more than a pleasurable food. Okay? It's not even a good fuel, honestly. Like, that would be if you went to the gas station and you, instead of grabbing the gas pump to put gasoline in your car, decided to just pull out some rubbing alcohol from your back seat and dump it into your gas tank. Now, it is an accelerant, it is a fuel, but for the type of machine you're putting it into, it's not a very good or choice fuel. This is very similar to junk food. It is still a fuel, but it's not a very good fuel. It's not one that's going to make you feel good, like physically. Maybe mentally for a short period of time it'll make you feel good, but physically it's not going to make you feel good. And if anything else, by eating all that junk food, you're also encouraging the bacteria in your gut to grow that doesn't like good, healthy fuel, which makes it harder to digest, which, at the end of the day, that's really what, that's really what changing your nutritional intake is really all about, is changing the biome inside of you. If you eat a lot of junk food, that's what your biome is used to handling. That's what your biome is going to handle. If you stop eating that junk food and you start eating good food, one of the first things you'll start to notice all of a sudden is, bloating that you may have not even realized you were experiencing will probably start to decrease. Your mood, just leaning it a little too far there, we went out of focus. Your mood may improve a little bit. You may sleep better. You may feel more restful in your sleep. And, these are things that you'll never notice if your status quo is just filled with junk food. Anyways, I kind of got off on a tangent there. So let's look back at the whole bored eating thing. We come to that same pyramid, that same fork in the road. It takes work. It takes practice. And, you can't beat yourself up if you slip up. You can't beat yourself up if you don't do it right that one time. You just have to put that behind you, and you have to move on to the next one. So if you're able to, get rid of those trigger foods, get rid of those junk foods. You don't need them. Try to swap out the behavior for something else. Now, with bored eating, one thing that I found for myself personally and with a lot of other people, when you're bored eating, you're also typically doing another activity that's relatively mindless, such as watching TV. So here's a really, really, really big tip that helped me with my bored eating personally, and it has helped other people that I've worked with too. Stop eating in front of the TV. If the TV is on, there's no food being eaten. All right? If you are watching television, you are not eating food. You are not snacking. You are not doing that. If you want to eat, you want to snack, you shut the TV off and you do that. I'll tell you, suddenly, it'll get real boring standing in your kitchen snacking on food. Then you'll want to do something else because you're bored doing that. No, but seriously, it is one of the biggest tips that I can offer you. Don't eat in front of the TV, especially if you find that you're a bored eater, and you tend to do that a lot. Now, this isn't going to fix your problem overnight, but it is going to start to help reduce the opportunities that you have to do that, to bored eat. I hope I was able to answer your question, guys. Unfortunately, it's a very tricky psychological topic, and the trick to it is that there's no trick to it. You have to recognize it, and you have to insert a different behavior. Because if you don't give yourself a different behavior, or if you don't remove the trigger, it's just going to keep happening. So at the end of the day, those are the two things that fix or work with you against behaviors that you don't like that are unhealthy. You either have to remove the trigger if it's within your control, or you have to insert a different behavior. That's it. Plain and simple. I know it isn't necessarily the answer we want to hear, but that's life. All right, guys. So next up, we're going to move on to our third question. And this came from our viewer, Carrie. This one was great because it is definitely relatable by a lot of people. So I'm going to read verbatim first what the question was. So random eating. Let's say you have a busy work-life schedule and you're just snatching up food between Zoom calls. So the question is there any specific tip for the work-at-home/remote learning set? Now, the cool thing is getting into this particular question it isn't just beyond, people who are working from home or remote learning, all that, but this is going to be very good for people who are in that boat as well. Chaotic eating, foraging, grazing, all these things, they all kind of come into this for people who lead very busy lives, for people who always seem to find that they don't have time for a proper meal. I can tell you that there's somebody in my life, very, very close to me, who oftentimes, either through forgetting or just not being poignant enough, doesn't actually make the time for their lunch. Now, when we live busy lives, when we're paid to do a job and get a job done, whether or not that takes 5 hours or 30 minutes, it can be hard to remember to budget that kind of time. But the first thing that I want to say to you is that your health is very important. It should be one of the most important things to you, because without that health, you can't do any of those other things that people rely on. If you're unhealthy, you can't work well for your boss. If you're unhealthy, you can't be super mom for your kids. If you're unhealthy, you can't keep a house, running smoothly. You can't keep your own life running smoothly if you're unhealthy. So we need to get out of the mindset, first and foremost, that we don't have time for proper nutrition. Because if you tell yourself you don't have time for proper nutrition, guess what? You're right. That actually brings us to one of my favorite quotes that I'll always claim over and over and over again. Whether you think you can or can't, you're right. That plays a lot into the whole actualization of reality. If you're convinced that you can't do this, you can't do that, you're right. You're never going to, because you won't even try. Why would you try if you've already told yourself you can't do it? So if you're telling yourself you don't have time for your nutrition, you're not going to have time for nutrition. It's not just going to magically appear out of thin air. You have to tell yourself, I do have time for this. I'm going to make the time for this. So that's what's going to bring us into how to really get around the whole chaotic eating and foraging. Now, you may not like this answer, but if you are one of those people that finds that they never have the time, well, you need to start making the time to do what's called meal prepping. It's not fun at first, because you're all of a sudden allotting a chunk of time that you could have been spending doing something else. But if you allot that chunk of time into one compact area, what that then allows is that you can kind of go about your chaotic ways, but now, instead of reaching for a bag of chips in between your Zoom calls, you can reach for a meal that you already prepared and nuked in the microwave for 2 minutes. So now you can actually eat something. You can put some fuel in your body that's going to be very good for you, that's going to help you continue to function throughout the day, and you did it quickly. You did it without having to stop everything that you're doing and go cook for 45 minutes. Because you already took that 45 minutes on another day to prepare all of your meals for the week. All right, so the solution to chaotic eating, the solution to foraging and grazing and overcoming the obstacles of being very busy, whether it's a remote learning environment, a working from home environment, having kids that you're trying to remote learn while working, you have to make the time to meal prep. So, first and foremost, find that block of time. Find that block of time on one day. I know it's not going to be easy. You're going to have to budget your time to do this. But unless you find that time and budget that time, there is no hope. You are going to continue to be in this chaotic loop. The only other solution, if you don't want to budget that time, is you use a meal delivery service. It's going to cost you money, but it's also going to help you not have to worry about budgeting your time. So that's really one of the cool things that's developed over the last decade, I want to say, and it's become a very accessible thing. And as it becomes more accessible, the price is dropping. But like anything else, if it's got to be prepackaged, if it's got to be done by somebody else and then delivered to you, you're not paying for the cost of the food, because at that point you're also paying for somebody else's time. So you have to remember that. What is your time worth? If your time is worth more than what it would take you to actually go through the trouble of prepping those meals, then you may want to actually consider some kind of prepped meal service. Now, I'm not talking about like a food service in which they deliver you a meal that you can cook, although that is another great option. There are services out there now that actually deliver you healthy meals, prepackaged, that all you got to do is pop in the microwave and you're good to go. Very similar to what you would be doing for yourself. So that's something to look into if you find that you don't have the time and you don't want to budget the time. Now, let's say you do want to budget the time. Okay, well, then that means you're going to have to start getting into meal prepping. So my suggestion would be to utilize the Google, or to become a paying member of Better University. Yeah, you like that little self-plug there? Because what we offer is we offer meal plans with recipe lists, grocery lists, and all that fun stuff. And within those meal plans, there's also a weekly meal prep. So that's something to consider. Now, again, if you want to budget the time for yourself rather than paying somebody else to, do the time budgeting for you, you can use Google. It's a very powerful resource. Just look up meal prep recipes, meal prep ideas. Pop open the Pinterest, pop open the Instagram. There's tons of people out there. There is tons of free, good information out there. You just have to budget the time to investigate it, to research it, and then implement it. So again, the fix to your question, Carrie, to get around chaotic eating is one of two things. Budget the time to meal prep, or budget in your own income to have somebody else meal prep for you. Whether that be somebody coming up with the plan and giving you all, taking the thought out of it, so all you have to do is do the grocery shopping and the cooking and the packaging, or pay somebody to cook the meal, package the meal, and deliver it directly to you. So those are your three options. Budget the time yourself, do the prepping yourself, pay somebody to take the thought out, or pay somebody to do the meals. All right? So again, maybe not the answer you were hoping to hear, maybe not the answer you wanted to hear, but that is how you're going to get around chaotic eating. You either have the food available to you or you don't. And you're only going to have it available to you by making the time or paying for that time. So I hope you guys have enjoyed today's show on nutrition, the nutrition condition. Like I said, we'll definitely be talking again about nutrition in the future. And I am going to try and keep our episodes to just about 30 minutes. So we're right at that mark right now. So we are going to wrap up. If you liked watching, please, I encourage you, subscribe to our YouTube channel. Head on down to our Facebook. Our Facebook page right down here, join. It's totally free to be a member of Better University. If you want to be a student of Better University, that's where membership options come in. But we've got a whole bunch of cool bells and whistles for student members. But we also have a lot of free stuff that we offer out for just members who hang out and, chat with us and ask questions. Knowledge is always free, and I'm always going to be around to try and answer questions as best I can. I'm always going to be around to help give you guys tips and tricks to find the best version of yourself, to work out the best version of yourself. Again, though, I really appreciate everybody's support, everybody who writes in with these questions, everybody who takes the time to watch this show, everybody who takes the time to work with me one-on-one as a client, or, just somebody working out with me in the gym as a friend. I love it all. And without you guys, I wouldn't be able to do what I do. Without you guys, there wouldn't be a purpose to do what I do. If nobody's listening, you're just barking in the dark. But I hope you guys got something out of today. I hope some of these questions and answers will help you with things that are going on in your life. And I hope you continue to be the best version of yourself. This has been Dan, the Fit Ferret, and I am out.